Hello, and welcome to episode 11 of the Scientology Chat podcast. Did we ever mention what the squirrel signifies? I don't remember. I have short-term memory, not by a normal medical condition, but
No, I don't think we ever did talk about what the squirrel image
well,
is
I,
about.
I I feel like that would be a good explanation. Also, not that probably everybody listening to this is probably interested in Scientology or part of Scientology or used to be, but I feel like that would probably be a good, you know.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to remember right now, trying to think of all through all the episodes if we ever talked about it, and I don't think we did.
Well, I like I said, I do not have a good memory, so I certainly do not remember if we talked about that.
Well, if we didn't and you don't know, in the Church of Scientology, if you use any of the materials, practices, tech, or whatever outside of the church,
Were you about to say technology?
well, I was gonna say techniques and technology,
Oh,
but
okay.
either way, if you do that outside of the church, that's called squirreling the tech, and yeah, they call practicing Scientologists who are not members of the church squirrels. And so I technically am a squirrel, even though if you've listened to this podcast, you know how much I adhere to the church's rules, to the annoyance of some of our listeners.
That and probably me, but hold on. What does a squirrel signify to somebody that's not in the church anymore? And putting nuts in their mouth, not to insinuate anything.
Well, how do you mean? Like,
Well, because obviously there's been a term made up for these people who have left the church but still want to practice Scientology, right?
right.
So where did that name come from? Do you know?
Because I don't know if this is true. This is just what I was told by somebody in Division 6 at the Oregon Sea in Salt Lake City.
Do your own research, people.
They said that it's called squirreling because L. Ron Hubbard thought that the misuse and misapplication of the technology by people who don't adhere to the standards of the church was nuts.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
That's at least what I was told, but I don't know if there's it doesn't say the word squirrel in any of the materials that I've ever seen, but so who knows, maybe there's a policy letter I don't know about that is where that word comes from.
Well, I was gonna say I was also told, not also by my mother when I was a young child, but the very few times, probably, I don't know, 3 times I have ever been to a church service in my life. I forgot where I was going with this. What were you talking about?
Squirrels and nuts.
Squirrels, nuts. Okay, church.
Oh boy.
Okay, yeah. I know there was a point. I was going somewhere. All right.
Okay.
What else do you want to talk about? I might get to it later.
Okay. Today we're going to talk about. Well, the first thing we're going to talk about is a question that was sent to us. There are others that I haven't addressed yet, but this is one where it was specific enough that I could look into it and find the answer relatively quickly.
Oh, is this the one right here?
Yep.
Oh, okay.
So, the first part of the question that we're going to talk about is, and I'll just read it here, is, I was wondering if you knew in what ways L. Ron Hubbard might have been inspired by New Church Christianity and Emanuel Swedenborg.
Well, okay, so I feel like we need an explanation of New Church Christianity as well as Emanuel Swedenborg.
Yep, so the first thing is, Emanuel Swedenborg was a scientist in this late 1600s, early 1700s.
Oh, that's the okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So for most of his life, he wasn't really religious. He just did different science. His most famous discovery I learned during this research was he was one of the first people to write down about smelting copper and iron together, according to Wikipedia. But
what does that do?
I have no idea, but it said it was an important discovery. But it said that was what first gained him a lot of fame in the scientific community. But later in his life, apparently he had some sort of vision of God or Jesus or something to do with that. And he, similar to L. Ron Hubbard, started to study and write down his beliefs of how he believed that the soul must be made of actual matter. And so that's why he started experimenting with smelting different metals together. That was his bread and butter and things like that. So
I don't know the scientifics in real life, but I know from watching Breaking Bad there is a very small piece of matter that is not accounted for in the human body.
Well, there were things that he discovered, again, according to Wikipedia.
He also sold meth.
That predate a lot of times when it was definitively discovered, like neurons. He theorized about the existence of neurons centuries before they were conclusively proven.
What about the Higgs boson, brother?
No, I don't think so. But that was what, throughout that, he wrote down all of these spiritual experiences that he had and what he started to believe about different things related to theology. And it's very interesting. I would definitely go in and read his Wikipedia page. There are a lot of sources and different books and stuff. There are English translations of his original materials.
Where is this guy from?
He was from Sweden.
Of course, fucking Swedenborg.
Well,
goddamn Swedenborgs.
Yeah. So
they don't hide it too well.
There are some particular things that L. Ron Hubbard was very open about what talks in great detail during the Dianetics lectures, the professional course lectures, introductions to Scientology, a lot of his lectures. And I've said this before, he talks about how he didn't just make everything up out of thin air. He studied a lot of different things from other people and started to try and apply it to himself. That's like why a lot of people say that Dianetics is almost like an offshoot of Buddhism in some ways, and they use that like it's detrimental to the religion of Scientology, like he just copied it and took it over. But I mean, all religions are based off of previous religions, and those religions are based off of all of spirituality goes back. Nobody just whipped everything out of thin air. And so
my I think it was, oh god, one of my fucking dad's wives had a little like Buddha like statue thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, oh yeah, if you rub my freaking stomach, you'll get good luck and fucking blah blah blah. Is it Buddhism or no? It's Hinduism where it's like if you're good in your life, you get like promoted into a different like set of being, and then if you're a piece of shit, you turn into like a blade of grass that gets eaten by a cow or something.
I think so. That might be both of them. I don't know enough about Hinduism, unfortunately, to really be able to say for sure, but I want to say that it's both of them.
All right, well,
because they're both Indian religions.
We need to be Indian?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so actual like India.
Yeah.
Not, Native American.
Yeah. Well, and so this is kind of just a little bit about this, where to talk about the similarities where L. Ron Hubbard may have agreed with some of the things in his writings. It's like I was saying, the neuron concept, it says a century before the full significance of nerve cells was ever realized. And then his association of frontal brain regions with intellect, which Scientology does. We've talked about this before, that in Scientology, your mind isn't physical. Your brain is physical. It's obviously a part of your physical body, but your mind can't be physical because, I mean, anybody who's ever worked in a nursing home has seen firsthand experience of how the physical body can be there, but the mind is gone.
Or any people that have had grandparents in any nursing homes.
Right.
And also the nervous system is just an extension of the brain. The nervous system are tendrils of the brain going throughout your body.
A big flying spaghetti monster wrapped in meat and water.
Oh,
yeah. But the other thing that he talked about was how he wrote a book where he tried to explain how finite is related to the infinite and how the soul is connected to the body. Infinity is a big part of Scientology. That's what the 8 means in the symbol for Scientology. 8 is the infinity dynamic or the God dynamic. So there are different little parts of it that when I read through it, I'm like, I could see that L. Ron Hubbard probably took from this. But the more I read about him, the more I noticed that even there's a lot of it that he was trying to base in science. And then the more I read, there was a lot that he was pushing on Christianity and through God and Jesus Christ. He did not believe in the Trinity like most Christian churches. He did not think God, Jesus Christ, and the Holy Spirit were one being in 3 forms like most Christian churches do.
Did he have an opinion about the LDS?
He was about 100 years before the LDS was created.
Born before the... Wait, hold on. He was not born before the tablets were fucking written by... Or not written by, but read... supposedly by Brigham Young.
Yeah, Joseph Smith was in the 1840s and 50s.
Hold on, Joseph Smith. Am I getting my shit mixed up?
Brigham Young was after Joseph Smith, after he was murdered.
Joseph Smith. So, okay, hold on. So who's the mountain man that he killed? Jebediah? No, Jebediah Smith. That's the dude you're talking about. No, it's Fort Bridger.
Oh, right, yeah.
Fucking something Bridger.
Yeah.
There's forts around here.
Yeah, I can only think of Jeff Bridges. That's getting
oh,
me
yeah,
fucked
Jeff
up.
Bridger.
Yeah, it's getting me fucked up.
The dude abides.
Yeah. But yeah, the Joseph Smith and the Golden Plates was, I think, in the 1840s.
They all... Oh, Jim Bridger.
Oh, right.
Young had Bridger killed.
Yeah.
And then took over his forts.
Yeah, if you're ever interested in some interesting American history that nobody likes to talk about anymore, you should go on Wikipedia or go on Google and look up the Mormon War. You would be you might be interested in knowing that Utah used to be an independent country and that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints fought an actual military confrontation against the United States government.
Well, that in Utah, New Mexico, Arizona, a lot of these states used to be a part of Mexico.
Yeah, and that's the whole reason the Mormons came here in the first place, and then America decided to come afterwards.
Well, that just, and I don't know if you're comfortable with me saying this on your podcast. It makes me, because I'm pretty sure this is like when Beavis and Butthead were like brought back in the early like 2010s, and it was fucking god awful. Except for this one joke, which I thought was hilarious. Which, if you're a history nerd like I am and this guy, you would understand and probably would get some chuckles out of. But I don't remember if it was either Beavis or Butthead, but one of them says, aren't Native Americans just Mexicans?
Oh, boy.
And technically, in a historical standpoint, yes, that would be true. Well, that also makes me think of just a nice side story. My brother is only 3 years older than I am. I dropped my e-cig. Anyway, I am only, well, I'll be 27 here in a few days. But my brother, who is only 3 years older than I am, thinks my mother, who was born in the 60s, grew up in fucking World War II. People, oh my god, I cannot understate how stupid people are in America.
Well, he says he listens to our podcast, so...
He did?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah,
what the shit?
Surprise.
All right, well, I didn't mean that.
Yeah. Before I get too sidetracked, the next part of this question, just to kind of wrap everything up with that, is that there are certain parts of Swedenborg's writings that make sense in the connection to Scientology, but a lot of it doesn't. There's way too much of it that he attributes to an almighty God or Christianity and things like that, as I read through all of his information. And like we've talked about here, Scientology does not have a supreme deity. There is a God, there is the God dynamic, and there is the immortal spiritual being, the Thetan, but Scientologist doesn't have a supreme being that everybody worships. There's no deity. The next part of his question was, you mentioned how Scientology is tolerant and even gay-friendly now, which I appreciate. But I also heard recently on one of the anti-Scientology podcasts that a family member of one famous Scientologist, there are names here that I'm not going to read because I haven't found out who these people are.
Unlike my name.
Had filed a report on another big Scientologist for having a supplements brand that advertised with a photo of a gay couple. Does that seem like a credible report to you, or do you think it's a dispute about something else that's being mischaracterized?
Dun, dun, dun.
So there's something important that everybody should understand about reporting people in the Church of Scientology that is often egregiously lied about.
Twist.
If you go to your the OSA or to Div 8 or I think it's Division 8. It's been a while. I don't have that chart in front of me.
I was going to say, what the fuck is Div 8?
But if you were to go and try to report or fill out a report paper on another Scientologist, and it was about something that had absolutely nothing to do with Scientology whatsoever, they wouldn't do anything about it. I wouldn't be able to go and report somebody at my org and say, I'm reporting this person because at their work they gave a high five to somebody who I don't like.
Oh boy.
That's basically what this person on this anti-Scientology podcast is saying. That they wrote a report saying that this person and the company that they own did an advertisement with a group of people that I don't like. And do you seriously think that the people in the Church of Scientology are going to take the time out of their day to investigate somebody or punish them at through the OSA for something like that? I understand that there's a lot of misconceptions about that, but in everything that you think about, we're going to use some Dianetics terminology here. The analytical mind is a perfect computer. It always generates the best solution possible, but the problem is that often we have imperfect data. So if you feed a computer with wrong data, it's going to give you a wrong answer. So before you make any assumptions and in all of your research, no matter what you're trying to get the answer for, you have to remember that there are things that you know, things you don't know, and things you don't know that you don't know. So, and that's one of the things we try to do here is I'm trying to help fill in the gaps for the people out there who want to know as much as possible and maybe learning that they didn't know things and they didn't even know that they didn't know them. So this is one of those cases. You cannot file a report for a person in the Church of Scientology for something that has absolutely nothing to do with the church. And there is another piece of this. I'm going to read you something here. I bookmarked it for this reason, that I wanted to illustrate why that kind of thing does not happen in the Church of Scientology.
Boy. Now you're freaking making him get his books out.
So it's not that long. I'm going to read you the code of a Scientologist. This is the code that's on the wall in every org. This is basically if you're a Scientologist, whether you are in or out of the Church of Scientology. This is from 1969 before people say that but while L. Ron Hubbard was still alive, so even if you aren't in the Church of Scientology proper, this would still be in the time that most outside of the church Scientologists would agree that tech was correct before it had been squirreled. Most people who practice outside of the Church of Scientology believe that the church itself has been squirreled. So this is the code of a Scientologist. There are 20 things on this, and the code reads, "As a Scientologist, I pledge myself to the code of Scientology for the good of all. 1. To keep Scientologists, the public, and the press accurately informed concerning Scientology, the world of mental health, and society. Hence why I do this podcast. 2. To use the best I know of Scientology to the best of my ability to help my family, friends, groups, and the world." Again, I've talked many times about all the things I've tried to do as a Scientologist to live up to that. 3. To refuse to accept for processing and refuse to accept money from any pre-clear or group I feel I cannot honestly help. So, that's every auditor and every Scientologist in theory is supposed to only take you on as a pre-clear or as a patient if they in good faith believe that they can help you with your problems.
Well, I was going to say Tom Cruise must really need some help then, huh?
Well, the number 4 is to decry and do all I can to abolish any and all abuses against life and mankind. 5. To expose and help abolish any and all physically damaging practices in the field of mental health, which we're going to talk about something good that's coming up on an episode related to that here in just a little bit. 6. To help clean up and keep clean the field of mental health. And there's a reason for all of this, is that you don't have to be a Scientologist to use Dianetics, but you have to believe in Dianetics to be a Scientologist. And fundamentally, Dianetics at its core thinks that psychiatry and mental health and people in that field prescribe psychiatric medications to people instead of actually treating them because they have a financial interest in not actually helping people.
Fiduciary responsibility,
right?
I believe is the correct term.
Yeah. 7 this is the last one about mental health. 7. To bring about an atmosphere of safety and security in the field of mental health by eradicating its abuses and brutality. 8. To support true humanitarian endeavors in the fields of human rights. 9. To embrace the policy of equal justice for all.
Okay, well, hold on. 8 and 9 sound like a lot of things that people should be understanding at this certain point in history.
Yeah.
Not to name any certain events anywhere.
Yeah, no kidding. God. Number 10, to work for freedom of speech in the world. 11, to actively decry the suppression of knowledge, wisdom, philosophy, or data which would help mankind.
Well, where is that practiced?
To what? To suppress knowledge, wisdom, and data that could help mankind?
To actively decry the suppression.
Yeah, to help fight against the suppression.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Where in any positions of power would that be happening? I mean, I guess maybe. I mean, really, one of the people that I think of is Bukele in El Salvador.
Oh, right. Yeah, I don't know. There's the group that deals with number 11 is called the Campaign for Human Rights. I was never a member of that group, but I know they mostly work in conflict areas in Africa.
I feel like they would be part of the group, like, you know, some old people, not to, you know, offend anybody, but all those people that are like, oh, that sounds like communism.
Well, I don't know. I'm honestly not sure what all they do. The only thing I've ever actively seen them doing is cleaning up, like, I can't remember. I know that in South Africa, they're building a huge thing to try and prevent racial discrimination by building schools. So I think that's what they think of as the suppression of knowledge, wisdom, and data that could help mankind by building schools for.
Well, speaking of Chile,
yeah.
that's where.
Speaking of Chile,
well, yeah, that's where we did our, you know, Milton Friedman. And
right,
the Chicago Boys.
Yeah,
fucking Pinochet.
Right.
That fucking asshole.
Um,
Anyway.
Number 12 is to support the freedom of religion. And number 13, which directly relates to the LGBT community, is to help Scientology orgs and groups ally themselves with public groups. And that doesn't just mean like organizations or like associations of different businesses or governments or anything like that. It means any group in the public. And so that's why the Church of Scientology in Division 6, which is the part that I worked the closest with, which is public relations in the Church of Scientology, was very open and interested in directly working with the gay pride event in Salt Lake City.
Which, that, not to get sidetracked again, but that makes me think of, there's this Family Guy episode where the gay news guys that live across the street from Stan, oh my gosh. One of them is a Republican.
Right.
And at the end of the episode, Stan realizes, hey, all this hate that we can use, from hating all the gays, we can take the gays in and use all that hate against the Democrats.
Yeah.
And then everybody cheers.
Right. Number 14 is to teach Scientology at a level it can be understood and used by the recipients, which is again something I try to do on this. 15, to stress the freedom and to use Scientology as a philosophy in all its applications and variations in the humanities. 16, to insist upon standard and unvaried Scientology as an applied activity in ethics, processing, and administration in Scientology organizations. This is where the Church of Scientology and the independent Scientologists are at odds with each other, is on number 16.
So them and the squirrels in...
Well, they both think each other is the squirrels.
Oh boy, everybody's squirrels.
Yeah.
Squirrels everywhere.
17 is to take my share of responsibility for the impact of Scientology upon the world. Again, something I try to do. 18, to increase the numbers and strength of Scientology over the world, which we talked about a little in the Breaking Points interview, where Aaron Smith Levitt was saying that Scientologists try to grow the church so that they can unlock the unreleased materials. I explained in that video, or that podcast, why I don't think that's true. It's a fundamental part of all religions to try and help other people. And Scientologists believe that by helping them use Dianetics, that they will be able to be helped. And so...
That, and if this is the first Scientology chat episode you're listening to, just go back to episode 1.
Yeah.
Just listen to all of it.
Right.
Please. I'm begging you.
And 19, this is where things come into a big thing with like... why a lot of people say Scientologists act so weird, or they try to act so nice and helpful and things like that. When people are too nice or too helpful, some people have an innate reaction to distrust that.
So do people distrust like the Boy Scouts and stuff?
Well, now there's a lot of reason to distrust Boy Scouts.
What is it? Courteous, helpful, kind,
yeah, something.
Like that. I don't fucking know.
Yeah.
I was never in the Boy Scouts. My brother was, though.
And so number 19 is to set an example of the effectiveness and wisdom of Scientology. And number 20, the last one, is to make this world a saner, better place. Those 20 things, no matter what parts of Scientology you do or don't believe, because as we discussed, you do not have to believe everything in Scientology, and almost everybody's interpretation of the materials are different. Those are the 20 core things of Scientology. And number 13, the one about helping Scientology ally itself with public groups, is why the whole thing about Scientology and homosexuality comes from 3 real things. The first one is that in Dianetics and in Self-Analysis, or Dianetics and Handbook for Pre-Clears, which came out in 1950 and 1952.
Oh, wow.
L. Ron Hubbard says that homosexuality is an aberration. Mind you, at that time, the American Mental Health Association also said that homosexuality was a mental illness.
And this would be in the 1950s.
Right. And so keep in mind
well, this is back when segregation was still a fucking big thing.
And so if you think about it, those are the only books where L. Ron Hubbard ever says anything about homosexuality directly. If you look in the glossary or you look in the index of every single other book of Scientology, it is not in there. And then if you actually compare, when you want to talk about tolerance of Church of Scientology compared to mental health as a whole, L. Ron Hubbard wrote a policy letter that we've talked about on this show before in 1964, where he said that any Scientologist who interrupts or disrupts the studies or impacts the life of another Scientologist over something like their family or sexual preferences would themselves be punished for doing so, and that the person who offended let's say a gay person, the person who offended them would have to pay for the study of the person they offended, and until they do that, that person cannot do any study themselves.
Well, is this kind of like anti-corruption laws and how nobody gets persecuted for it, or is this have a little bit of a different...
Well, it's more like writing a report. Like if I was at the Salt Lake Org, and which never happened to me, but if I was at the Salt Lake Org and I felt like there was somebody there who was being mean to me or making fun of me about being gay or anything like that, even a member of the Sea Org or the highest executive at the org, if I felt like that person was preventing me from going to the org out of fear of being made fun of or because they didn't like me, then I could file a report against them, and they would not be able to do any study until they paid for my studies, because that's the kind of thing that and that is still in force. There's a huge book in the in every org that goes over the exact procedure of things like that happen, and so that still happens.
I mean, there's a Constitution and a Bill of Rights and everything, but that doesn't seem to mean too much anymore.
Yeah, that's very true. Everything, I guess, depends on the person who is in charge. Yeah, but I do know that kind of thing. I mean, the only reason I ever got into the only reason I ever left the church was because of something similar to that. Not the homosexuality thing, but the reporting and things like that. So they still do it, and you can still appeal and have your whole situation discussed with the OT committee and things like that.
Is it like arbitration with like normal big companies where, you know, all the arbiters are on, you know, they're basically working for the company that you're trying to have a complaint against, and most of the times they do side with the company because they have a incentive.
I know from personal experience with the OT committee that because there's no lawyers or anything like that, you and the other person go before the OT committee.
I don't think in arbitration you have lawyers either.
I don't know. I'm not sure.
I'm pretty sure in arbitration it's just you and this little committee.
Well, I know
that's part of the company.
I'm not. Yeah, I only know that there's arbiters, but I don't know what their job actually entails.
Who's the arbiter of anything? Who shows this?
But that's basically how the process works, and so, but I was gonna say that L. Ron Hubbard wrote that policy letter almost 10 years before the American mental health groups declassified homosexuality as a mental illness. So Scientology did that and started to actively protect their gay members, especially at that time when it was most frequently used. I mean, he wrote the policy letter because it was happening too much, that they had to do something about it to help protect those members. And the policy letter didn't come from somebody else. It came directly from L. Ron Hubbard. So, yeah, the Church of Scientology is not homophobic. There may be members who are, but if they actively try to harm you or prevent you from being one because you're gay or anything else, report them. that's kind of where what I wanted to talk about with that section. And then the final bit here that I wanted to go over and if you were listening because of the title of this, I apologize that we saved this until the end of the podcast. But the final thing we're going to talk about...
You got to save the best for last. Don't apologize.
But
get over it.
We're going to talk about disconnection in Scientology because there's so many videos where I'm sure that the practice of disconnection and declaring people as a suppressive person or whatever has been abused by executives in the church. Of course it has, without question.
And speaking for probably, I don't know, maybe only one other person listening to the podcast besides me that doesn't have anything to do with Scientology. God, what were you just saying? God, I had a fucking question.
Suppressive persons.
No, before that. There was something you said before suppressive persons. There was another term you were throwing around.
Oh, God.
All right, never mind.
I can't remember.
All right, never mind. Let's move on.
So this is... Now, there's a book that I've told you about before called A Guide to Scientology Ethics, and it's basically the entire legal code that works in the Church of Scientology, including for internal affairs. So it's not just... So the rules and requirements of declaring somebody an SP and the rules and requirements for disconnection are all very clearly laid out in this book.
Is this like when the Pentagon audits itself and then it fails every time?
No, this is like if you are being harassed or hurt by somebody else in the Church of Scientology with what we were just talking about, by being gay and they're preventing you from going to a church, then you have to then the church has to handle it because they're not breaking a law, but it still needs to be dealt with.
So it was like almost any other religion?
Basically in any kind of situation where any company or organization where if there are internal matters that can't be handled legally,
they investigate them themselves, and you just have to say, oh yeah, you investigated yourself, I trust that.
But they're not investigating themselves. The church, you as a member are having the church investigate another member.
Well, my problem is they're all part of the same organization.
But the same organization as you.
Okay, maybe I'm not understanding this right.
Yeah, so it's I as a Scientologist have a problem with another Scientologist.
Right.
And it's not something I can call the police about, or as if they'd be any help anyway.
Yeah, no, fuck
that.
If
there's that kind of a problem, then a group of members from the church who have no connection to either of us deal with the problem.
But the connection is through the church,
but they're connected to both of us.
Well, right, but there has to be a hierarchy.
If it's somebody who is higher up in the church, then the rules change. There are specific ways that it has to be handled.
Well, that goes back to the fucking Constitution and shit.
In theory, as long as these rules are followed, it's supposed to protect you from being abused by people higher up in the church too.
Well,
but
you know,
every rule is only as good as the people who follow and enforce it. So
okay, yep. Well, I agree on that.
So this is the term disconnection defined in an introduction to Scientology ethics. The term disconnection is defined as a self-determined decision made by an individual that he is not going to be connected to another. It is a severing of a communication line.
Oh, good. I was gonna ask you what that meant.
Yeah, so when people say that they've been forced to disconnect from people, like there are a lot of critics of the Church of Scientology who claim that their family and friends are forced to disconnect from them. That's not true. No one can, especially in the modern world. I said this in a previous thing. In the modern world, nobody could force you not to talk to somebody else between Snapchat, Facebook, fucking all the apps where like your messages disappear and are completely untraceable after a certain time.
You would have to be complicit at some point.
Yeah. And people say, well, they're brainwashed into disconnecting from them. It's like, if you honestly think at this point, if you've listened to enough of these episodes and you've heard, I find it very hard to believe that brainwashing someone is as easy to accomplish as as everybody seems to make it out to be with the Church of Scientology. So we'll leave it at that, or I'll leave it at that, but...
Well, I mean, I do have a question, if you don't mind.
Mm-hmm.
Because, like, with the people in Waco,
Mm-hmm.
like, some of those people were kind of brought up into that as children and were horribly burned alive.
Right.
But I mean, at a certain point, like you really can't blame the person.
Yeah.
Because it goes back to that old argument of nurture versus nature.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, I do agree with that, but I think that certainly applies to all religions, not just Scientology. That if you're brought up in a religion and your people around you instill in you bad morals or a bad code of living your life by, like
bad juju,
right? Like Christian Scientists or some of the most ardent Baptists or militant Islam or things like that.
Any evangelists,
right?
Any of them.
Those kinds of. There are certainly situations like that where people can genuinely not know better. But in Scientology, it's harder for me to believe that that's so easy to accomplish unless people are actively not following the rules, which I find so hard to believe that could be so systematic across the church, because if you ever go into an org, spend time in the org, they are very, very strict about adhering to the rules.
Well, also, not to, you are, I don't know, were you like half Canadian? What are the, what's the percentage here, would you say?
The best way to put it is that I spent a significant amount of time in Canada.
Okay.
I don't want to say it. I don't want to put too much information out there.
There's my point. Okay. Well, if you spent your entire life in America, and I get that you spent a good chunk of your life in Idaho, which is a little more right-leaning than Utah is, even though Utah is certainly right-leaning.
Mm-hmm.
God, I forgot where I was going with this. The fuck were we talking about?
Oh my gosh. People being brought up religiously, not knowing any better.
Okay.
And being brainwashed.
It's like parts of the Bible Belt, like Rhett and Link.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
Up until their, like, 30s, they were evangelists, fucking whatever they do in fucking...
My grandma was brought up as in a Christian church where they did the whole speaking in tongues, holding up holding up venomous snakes. They did the whole thing.
I want to see a video where somebody is just speaking in tongues and they just get fucking slapped.
Yeah.
And see what the reaction is.
But I can't remember where we were at.
Sorry.
Now.
I got
so disconnection and brainwashing, where people are saying they're brainwashed and that's why they accept disconnection. I do not think that is real. I don't think that is legitimate. Even if you were raised in the church, which, like some of these Scientologists, they raised their own children in the church and now their children have chosen to disconnect from them. If it really is a product where they are brainwashed to the point of disconnecting from you, and you are their parent, do you see where I'm going with this? I mean, it's really hard, like we've talked about before, when the second dynamic, one of the most important dynamics, is the family dynamic, that it's hard for me to believe that your children would be able to disconnect from you and be complicit in disconnecting from you if they did not have some sort of grievance beyond you speaking out against the Church of Scientology. But on some cases, There are certain people who speak out against the church where their children have chosen to disconnect from them, where I do believe that because they are explicitly lying about things that we may or may not have covered on this show directly, that is why they have opted to disconnect from you. And I know that the church make mountains out of molehills for certain individuals, but there are other instances where there are genuine police reports for some former Scientologists who were kicked out of the church and now wonder why their children have disconnected from them, when there are repeated examples of police reports in some cases of domestic abuse, of child abuse, of things of that nature. So this is where we talk about you have to do your own research. Don't just take my word for it. Don't just take their word for it. Don't just take the church's word for it. Look up everything you can find about it.
Multiple sources.
Right. So we're with disconnection. Before someone can be disconnected, you have to attempt to handle the situation. And that's just obvious. I mean, don't really need to explain that. But the reason disconnection exists is that, and it says here, much like trying to deal with a criminal, if he will not handle, which means if he can't be if he won't, basically it's like if you continue to commit the same crime after they keep putting you on probation or something like that, eventually society resorts to the only other solution. It disconnects the criminal from society by putting them in jail or prison. Which, I mean, here I am.
Well, goddamn, that just makes me think about how anybody listening, if you are in the United States, I'm not sure how it works in a lot of the other places. I mean, I guess if you're in a Western country, it might work kind of the same way.
Yeah.
But a lot of our police officers and peace officers, I guess the government likes to call them.
Yeah.
Live in separate cities, and when they get up to go to work, they have to drive 15, 20, 30 miles to get to another town. That way, when they arrest a bunch of people and harass people, they're not in the same neighborhood as them. So there's a disconnect.
Yep, community policing should be mandatory in the whole country.
Goddamn right.
Okay, I'm going to read you this entire passage for this about the history of disconnection.
Okay,
and there's a certain part where I think you'll really like what L. Ron Hubbard writes in this.
Okay, well, I will try my best to not interrupt.
Well, it's not that long, but I'll read it relatively quickly. So this kind of goes over something we talked about earlier. So, the history of disconnection. Earlier, disconnection as a condition was canceled. It had been abused by a few individuals who had failed to handle situations which could have been handled and who lazily or irresponsibly forced somebody to disconnect, thereby creating situations even worse than the original because it was the wrong action. Secondly, there were those who could only survive by living on our lines. They wanted to continue to be connected to other Scientologists, which is the whole thing most people who have been disconnected from talk about. They're like, if you leave the church, they force you to lose all your friends, which is not true. I am still in contact with a lot of Scientologists, even though I left the church, although I'm not an SP or a potential trouble source or anything.
And I'm not a Scientologist, but we've been friends since you've been in the church,
right,
and not in the church.
Yeah. Okay, so, thus they screamed to high heaven if anyone dared to apply the tech of handle or disconnect. This put Scientologists at a disadvantage, and this is the part that I was going to say that I think you'll agree with the most.
Okay.
We cannot afford to deny Scientologists that basic freedom that is granted to everyone else, the right to choose whom one wishes to communicate with or not communicate with. It's bad enough that there are governments trying through the use of force to prevent people from disconnecting with them or disconnecting with others. The bare fact is that disconnection is a vital tool in handling potential trouble sources and can be very effective, but only when used correctly. Therefore, the tech of disconnection was restored to use in the hands of those persons thoroughly and standardly trained and with potential trouble sources. Now, there's another specific part of this that I wanted to read here is... I gotta find it. I should have highlighted it. I forgot.
Well, I just want to say I do agree with everything you just said. That is Yeah.
Right.
Good shit.
Okay, this is the part. When an ethics officer finds that a Scientologist is a potential trouble source to a family member, he does not recommend that the person disconnect from the antagonistic source. The ethics officer advises the Scientologist to handle it. So there is more. It talks more about this throughout this book. In general, if you look through the index, you can find every mention of disconnection and suppressive persons. But it explicitly says in this book that you cannot order a person to disconnect from their family member. You have to order them to handle it, and then they can choose to sever connection lines if they want to. Now, again, like it even says in this book, there are obviously cases where it has been and probably still is being abused, but this book is the fundamental part of how the church handles things. So if somebody is, and maybe people don't know, it's hard for me to believe people could dedicate themselves to 15 plus years of studying the church and not know this book. But regardless, that's against the rules. People may break the rules, but it's up to the person who's being wrong to take it upon themselves if they want to overcome that, to understand everything.
Take accountability.
Right. So that's what I wanted to talk about. That's only a small part. If there was only one book, if you're curious or interested in those kinds of things that you hear about Scientology, of people saying that they're being put into, I don't know, there are people who say that they get locked in like Scientology jails and stuff. I find so much of that so hard to believe, even though I acknowledge that if it does exist, I wouldn't be a person who would know. But when I hear all of these former Sea Org members who would have been able to know, they always say, I heard about. They never say, I saw. And
And did they say what source or how trustworthy that it was from?
They'll like with the Breaking Points interview.
It's all
he
just
said
hearsay?
that he says that with his case where he says he heard about all the abuse. He says he heard about it from other former Scientologists.
Hearsay
who
does
left.
not hold up in court.
So I know this episode was a bit long because we talked about a myriad of different things, but at the end of the day, this is kind of. When it comes down to it, I wanted to specifically point out disconnection, because if you want to know how it's applied in the church, you don't even need to ask other Scientologists about it. You can read it from the source. And if you are being told about these different abuses, it's amazing to me how the people themselves who are directly abused never seem to come forward unless it's on some big media show. And then, I mean, virtually everything on television is full of shit.
Well, the Me Too era has passed, so
right.
If they wanted to, their chance is gone.
Yeah. So that kind of wraps up everything we were going to talk about today. We were all over the place on this episode with different questions and answers, and we'll talk about more. I've got some more individual questions that we're going to address in more episodes. But
wait, hold on. Did I see any of these questions? Probably not.
They were the ones that I showed you about from that person.
Son of a bitch.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I don't remember those.
Oh, there is one final thing that I wanted to address in this episode too, even though we're almost at an hour already. The final thing I wanted to say, because I've been getting questions about people asking me about interpreting different things that L. Ron Hubbard said.
Also, if anybody is still listening, thank you.
Yeah, definitely. So, and I'll probably talk about this more on the next episode too, just to cover the bases. But because of these questions I've got where people ask like, well, L. Ron Hubbard said this, and what does that mean? Or why did L. Ron Hubbard say this? Or what does he mean by this? And things like that. And I cannot stress to you enough that the fundamental rule of Scientology is that something is only true if it's true for you. That means using the materials and the tools to do it yourself, and then whatever your outcome is after you do it for yourself and you study it yourself, then it becomes either true or not true for you. Don't believe stuff in Scientology just because L. Ron Hubbard says it. And I know that may seem like a shocking revelation to some people to hear me say that, but I've said that in the org with other active COS Scientologists. I've said it to independent Scientologists and non-Scientologists who have asked me questions on Facebook.
Oh.
So,
Oh.
yes.
Okay, so hold on. So you're saying that, sorry, can you?
We were mostly just talking about something is only true if it's true for you.
Okay, no, yeah, that's the thing. Okay, that brings me back to the Me Too thing.
So
the whole my truth.
We talked about that.
There's an absolute truth.
We talked about that. This is different from the Me Too thing.
God. All right, sorry everybody for bringing this back up.
No, you're okay. So
I'm not apologizing to you.
Oh yeah. So yeah. In lectures or in his personal journals or even in the materials, there is a fundamental thing that everybody has to understand about L. Ron Hubbard and some of the things in the books. Dianetics is 74 years old.
Hey, that's almost as old as
So when you go through his materials, there is an important thing you have to understand. The Scion in Scientology means science. So unlike most religions, we don't discredit science just because L. Ron Hubbard said something 74 years ago. So, for example, at that time, L. Ron Hubbard and his generation did not know about things like DNA and did not have an understanding of genetics.
They probably didn't have MRIs back then either.
I don't think so. So there are, and that's just an example. So there are times where L. Ron Hubbard created a method, and then he used the best knowledge he had at the time to try and understand how that method worked. Now, the fact that how it worked has changed over time doesn't change the fact that it worked. And whether it works or not is up to you to interpret, and that's what I mean by something is only true in Scientology if it's true for you. You don't have to believe something because we say you can do it. You believe it because you learn how to do it, try it, and if it works, then it's true for you. So, go ahead.
Okay, no, I mean, I get, like, everybody's different and all that, but I don't know. That, man. I don't know. I have a problem with that because I mean, like everybody's different. Obviously, the same things that work for some people won't work for others.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody has a different physiological thing going on in their brains, all that stuff. Oh man, I don't know.
Well, the actual mental health stuff isn't open to if it's true in that part.
Oh.
Everything in the mental health portion that you can actually do for yourself, and that's all under Dianetics. So that, which is not open to something is only true if it's true for you.
So it's a book I have to read?
So everything in Scientology, everything after Dianetics, self-analysis, once you get to the book, Scientology, A History of Man, that's where you cross the line from Dianetics and it turns into Scientology. Scientology only deals with spiritual things. And so that's why once you cross from Dianetics, which is actual mental health, when you cross into the realm of spirits and the Thetan and your soul and the afterlife and everything, that is where Scientology goes from Dianetics does work for everyone if it's applied correctly and if you are a good auditor. And then you cross into Scientology where there are different things with spiritualism where something is only true if it's true for you, because Scientology doesn't feel like it's appropriate to force you to believe about things that cannot be proven. unless you discover it and agree that it is true for yourself. Because there is no way to, at least as of right now, there is no way to prove definitively what is or isn't true once you cross into the area of religion and spirits and your soul and things of that nature.
Well, not to, if, so you're a member, well, used to be, I guess I should clarify. You're not eligible to use a e-meter. That's correct?
I couldn't use one of the current e-meters, but I could use an older one.
Okay. Well, we should get one of those and test it out.
Yeah.
I think people would like to see or hear that.
Yeah.
Unless you want to see the sound waves, brother.
Right. Yeah, so I mean that basically wraps everything up on this where everything that we talked about today, we crossed over an hour on this episode. But yeah, if you think of any other questions you have for us, I mean we've got some that I'll be working on, some things we wanted to talk about. Definitely let me know. And I wanted to end this time by saying, just because of a couple of things that I've seen in discussions about our podcast on certain websites. I am a Scientologist. So if you listen to this podcast and you are confused or concerned about why I am so pro Scientology, I am one. That doesn't mean I haven't criticized the church or talked openly about certain aspects of it.
Well, but I was gonna say, as so far as I've known you, you're not exactly pro Scientologist, but pro Dianetics.
Yes, that is definitely more specific. And in particular, I don't claim to be an expert on all things Scientology, but I definitely would consider myself very expert on the topic of Dianetics.
All right, well, yeah. Mr. Expert over here.
Oh, boy. Okay. Well, that pretty much wraps up everything we were going to talk about. So next week, I will have some big information about about something that we're going to be doing too, an interview with a person that's going to come onto the podcast. But I'll give you more details about that on our next week episode. Was there anything else you wanted to say?
Shit. Well, I don't know. Read books, world peace. God, when I look at your laptop, all I see is a freaking Apple logo. Just get Windows, people. Don't waste your time with an iMac. There's so much more accessible, so much more software available for Windows. Not that Apple isn't Tim Cook is the first Apple CEO to deny the police passcodes to somebody's iPhone.
Yeah.
Unlike Liberty Safes, which weren't even asked by the FBI. They voluntarily gave them the codes to their customers' safes. Oh, Jesus Christ. All right. Well, all right. If you're living in America, get ready for a rough fucking time coming up.
What a cheerful note to end on this episode. Well, thank you again for listening, especially if you made it all the way to the end of another one of our longer episodes. Have a good rest of your night, and we'll be back next week.
Bye.